Herzlich begrüßen. Mein Name ist Björn Negemann von Kongress Media zu einem weiteren IOM-Talk hier am Dienstagnachmittag, heute dem 1.9. Beginn meteorologisch des Herbstes. Der Sommer ist vorüber. Wir sind jetzt auch schon eine gute Weile dabei mit unseren IOM-Talks als Begleitung zu unserem IOM-Summit und als Vorbereitung zum IOM-Summit, der ja dieses Jahr auch komplett digital läuft. Dementsprechend machen wir auch die Begleitung nur noch digital als Videoformate. Und da ist unser wöchentlicher IOM-Talk das Mittel der Wahl, wo wir uns immer wieder Experten einladen, mit denen wir zu einzelnen Themenpunkten, die auch in der Agenda des IOM-Summits dabei sind, diskutieren. Und beim IOM-Summit geht es ja um den Wandel hin zum digitalen Arbeiten und der Etablierung einer Haltung zum digitalen Arbeiten, aber auch natürlich den Anforderungen an die Organisation, wie die sich verändern muss, dass digitales Arbeiten realisiert werden kann. Und dabei ist natürlich immer wieder die Fragestellung, wie passen wir die Organisation dahingehend an, dass sie flexibler und adaptiver auf Umweltanforderungen eingehen kann. Und das ist heute auch unser Thema, mit dem wir uns heute beschäftigen wollen, nämlich das Thema Adaptive Organizational Design. Und hierzu haben wir eine Expertin dabei, die auch letzte Woche in unserem Parallelprogramm beim Digital Work Disruption Konferenz dabei war. Da darf ich ganz herzlich begrüßen die Dr. Erika Jacobi. I'd like to welcome Erika because she is living in New York and is an expert in this field of adaptive organization design, and therefore we have a IOM talk today in English. Hello, Erika.
Hi, Björn. Thanks so much for having me, and thanks so much for doing this in English.
You're welcome. So, can you give us a little bit background to your person? I already introduced into the topic that we're talking about adaptive organization design today. You have done a lot of research work in this field as well as consultancy work, but please introduce yourself.
Sure. Again, my name is Erika Jacobi. I live in New York City, and I'm the managing director of LC Global Consulting. We are a consulting firm that specializes in change, growth, and innovation processes for large-scale organizations, Fortune 50, mid-sized organizations, and also very, very small organizations. And we have offices in New York City and in Munich, Germany. So our work focuses a lot on the adaptive organization. We've implemented and co-created. I always like to talk about co-design and co-creation because in my eyes, that's the only way things can work when it comes to agility and the adaptive organization. So we've done that kind of work with a number of clients on 3 continents, and it's very rewarding work because it unleashes so much energy in an organization, and I think that's really part of it. You mentioned my research. I have a PhD in organizational change and development and a master's in human and organizational behavior systems and development, and my research has been around what is the identity like, the identity dynamics in successful organizations that have also adapted over the years, because the question is, if we change, what makes us us? So maybe that's me in a nutshell.
Great. So let's have a look at the topic, adaptive organization designs. What is it about in your definitions and your notion?
Mm-hmm. Very good question, because I think there is a lot of woo-ha around the terminology. In my eyes, an adaptive organization is an organization that is set up to effectively meet unexpected and expected change requests and change needs. And it's really as easy as that. And the rest, in my eyes, is a process of discovering what works best for you. But at the heart of the adaptive organization is the understanding that things will change and that you will have to change. There is this constant change readiness that you want to implement in your organization, that you want to plant seeds for in your organization, because you know that the world around you is changing. And maybe nowadays it's very drastic with COVID and with weather changes, climate changes, and so on and so forth. But it's always been a topic. Markets change, markets have always changed. And so in an organization that has that change capacity, you want to be ready for adapting to your clients' needs and to your customers' needs.
Are companies already aware of this yet?
That's a very good question. Statistically, way under 10% have done an agile transformation. And by that, I mean like enterprise agility, or have become, or even only tried to become, an adaptive organization. So statistically, I would say people are aware of it, companies are aware of it, but has it worked that often? And the numbers are not quite there yet. So it's quite a process in my eyes. Being aware of it is one thing. Changing your organization so that it can become adaptive and agile and even foresee the future, and as Otto Scharmer said, learn from the future as it emerges. That's such a mindset shift, and it's also a structural shift. And in my eyes, it's one of the biggest structural and mindset shifts that we can even only fathom in organizations. So it's quite an endeavor. So yes, the awareness is there, but how many companies have successfully done this? Not so many. So the statistics from the big consulting firms are actually not under 10%.
So if you evaluate organizations, at what point of restructuring would you say they have a really adaptive design?
The proof is.
I mean, it probably starts already with a different mindset, that you're not that you're more flexible in what you're doing, certainly. But how much? Where would you say, well, okay, if we talk about the numbers that that companies have done this, and only a small number, have they really adapted to a new organizational design in the whole, or just in parts of their company?
That's a very, very good question. And I'm not sure whether I have the answer, but it's a very good question.
But at least in your perception, I mean, that's already...
Yes. So in my eyes, the proof is in the pudding. For example, take this current crisis. How well were you as a company, how well were you with your company able to adapt? Was it easy? Was it a big woo-ha? So that's the first indicator, right? Then there are other indicators, structural indicators. How hierarchical are you? How many levels of hierarchy do you have? How lean are you? You can't adapt very quickly if you have a lot of clutter and if you have a lot of, we call it waste. How lean are you? Or how much baggage do you have? Those are questions that you really need to ask yourself. And it's also, I sometimes say, clever consulting firms have the idea, oh, let's go agile, let's become an adaptive organization. And then people just do it. That's bound to fail. I think you need to know, what is your organization? How is your organization structured at the moment? And how much of a leap is it actually to make it to the other side? Because what we usually say an adaptive organization is about, it's usually less hierarchy for sure. So we try to do away with hierarchy levels. We try to have as much power in the teams as possible, network-based teams, self-organized teams. The decision-making should be on the team level so that they can quickly make the decisions. So it's on the structural level, then it's also a mindset. That's what it starts with. Do we want to adapt, or do we just want to sit it out? And then the other thing that's very, very important, and that's where lean and digitalization actually play a big role. How good is your information flow, right? And that's where the hierarchy comes into play. If you have a thought up here and then you need to trickle it down, that's really old change management terminology. You trickle it down, and then down here it gets lost in translation, literally. So if an adaptive organization is a flat organization, and it has a seamless information flow so that everybody is informed, and we use data for that. And I think one of the best examples is, for example, Sarah, the fashion retailer. They have their retail shops out there, the shops that everybody goes to, and their salespeople on the ground send information back, data that they collected, of course, in a digital form. It gets sent back to the headquarters, so to speak, and there they produce new fashion items weekly, maybe even bi-weekly. So if the salespeople say, people want more skirts, people want more, I'm a little bit out of my league here, but you're getting the idea. People want more blue skirts, or shorter skirts, longer skirts, or no, we want dresses. Then they take that information and change their productions around this. Mm-hmm. And that is adaptive, right? Before the big tragedy has even only happened. And of course, you need to have the mindset for it. You need to have the structures for it. You need to have the lean information flow and seamless information flow, and you need to have the data.
The question for me is whether adaptive design can only be realized by some certain types of companies, because you mentioned Zara. Zara is certainly a sales-driven company. It's also has a franchise structure in it. It's always market-driven. And actually the success of the company is certainly dependent on whether you perceive the market trends or not. So therefore, it's very much outside in terms of when it comes to how we define the success of the company. If we take an engineering company, good old German company, it's more or less the product, the engineering quality, and so on. So it's always this insight. Is there a difference that I see that these engineering companies are probably have a harder time to become adaptive than the sales-driven companies?
I see what you mean, and I always think, once a company has successfully done that, which is actually rare, right? So let's face it, and it's also easier if you start out, right? It's in my eyes, it's a big difference whether you plan your company like this as a startup, or whether you are a traditional organization and you've been around for 100 years and you have 440,000 people around the world and you're structured in a certain way, and now, oops, let's go agile, let's do this, that, and the other. That's, of course, there is a challenge, but it's also that startups that become bigger, at the beginning, they're lean, they're very agile, very adaptive, and then they also have the same problem as they become bigger. So size really matters, yes, I would say that. The rest, and also the size in my eyes, is a matter of soul searching. In my eyes, it can be done for any kind of company, for any type of organization, and in my eyes, it also has to be done for any type of organization. And let's take the unforeseen changes, right? In sales-driven companies, for example, yes, we do know we want to be very, very customer-driven, and we want to, of course, sell as much as possible. So we do know that's an expected change need. But take COVID, take climate change, take all these radical changes in what I call the hyper-VUCA times. Hyper volatility. We can't say, oh, we don't, we want to keep on doing our things. I think that will just create fear and paralysis. So in my eyes, we have to do something. But if you're asking me what exactly do we have to do, I think that's where things have gotten out of hand. In my eyes, a company that's super hierarchical and that's maybe in the manufacturing industry and whatever, they can't just say, okay, we're going to do what Sarah did, right? So that's where I think the co-creative part becomes very, very important, so that you design something that works for your company. It doesn't have to work for all the other companies. It has to make your company adaptive. And that's the process of analyzing your company as to what is it like at the moment? What are your success factors? What are your strengths? What do we need to preserve? I always say when it comes to large scale organizational change processes, the biggest question is what do we need to preserve so that your company stays your company? It's easy to turn your company into something totally different and then be successful, but then you would have lost your entire identity. The question is how you, with your company, can become successful with what you bring to the table. And then we need to declutter here and there to bring that out in an adaptive way. Usually traditional companies are more cluttered, and it takes a little bit of decluttering to find out how we can make things more adaptive and more vibrant again too, right? And I do think it can be done and needs to be done in any organization. Where, with what, how, that is a longer soul searching process. And I think that's where I would also urge every single consultant and every single consulting firm to really be very mindful about that. Large scale organizational change is not so easy, right? We need to be very responsible and mindful.
But how are you starting if you are faced with a client from a traditional large scale company? Where would you start, or what would you advise the company to start with going into this adaptive organizational design thing?
We always start with an analysis that is really
of the whole company or of parts of the company?
Of the whole company. And I think that in my eyes, that's very, very, very important, right? So, and in my eyes, it's also very important to not look for, most companies look for like, what's wrong and how can we fix this? We look at what's really, really great and how can we do more of what's really, really great? And how can we make that shine? And then what do we need to chip away? For companies that want to do the soul searching, maybe within their own organization, I think it would be really great to sit down with your teams and start a collaborative process. You know, the adaptive organization is really around those very driven teams and bring them in right away. You know, what makes you strong and how can you live that and practice that under the changed circumstances, if we're talking COVID, for example, right? So if you start, I think the biggest mistake is that the top starts thinking about what can we do now given the current situation. And then, oh, okay, let's roll that out. You already hear that in the vocabulary. It's very old change management terminology. You have in any company out there that's still alive, you have vibrant teams. You have people that want to bring in their intellectual capacity. They want to not only be involved, they want to drive things, right? So go back to the roots and really understand, what do your people think makes you strong? What do your people think? And it might even be that for a while people say nothing. Right now we're on the ground and it's been going on for such a long time. Maybe they will say nothing, but then you're at least talking about it. And then at one point, people will have ideas as to what we can do now. And from there, I think you can really consistently ask yourself the question, how can we achieve it in our company on a structural level, on a behavior level, and so on and so forth, and a cultural level, that we want to be ready to meet unexpected and expected change needs with an effective answer. And I always think the proof is really the effective answer. A lot of companies just do something, but it's not effective. And I think you cannot afford to not involve and ask your biggest assets in the companies, which are your employees. They know, it's in the collective intelligence.
At the IOM Summit, we're certainly are focused on discussing how to establish a new mode of working, mainly collaborative, digital enabled working mode. So, and certainly with this, a lot of projects always have in mind that it's not the technology, it's the mindset, it's some kind of higher purpose they have to follow up. And certainly at the end, we're ending up at the VUCA environment that we certainly want to support with the digital working at the end. This is mainly the discussion point for us at the IOM Summit. On the other, you're coming from the other side. You're coming from the organizational change management. You're not beforehand involved in establishing a digital working mode. But how do you see from your perspective the developments of new working experiences and collaborative working experiences to support this this change, especially this what you earlier mentioned, the growing and the igniting of vibrant teams that work together, come together and create something. Is this very much supportive, and is this very much what you are seeking from the organizational design part that should be more supported and growth in a larger sense, in a scaling sense, to achieve also on a common ground this new organizational design at the end?
Yes, I mean, we very often get involved when there is a digital transformation because digital only goes that far. But I think it's very, very, very important. Sometimes the question is always like, what's first, the chicken or the egg, right? So sometimes we very often actually go into an organization and we work on the structures and on the transformation side from an organizational and people perspective and a structural perspective. And there we always work very collaboratively. That means we will also really see how people work. And I can't tell you how often when we do this analysis, we come across working conditions that are really, really suboptimal, right? And that's where we say, okay, you want to enable your people with great digital support, right? If you know of a way that we, or other companies do know of the way where we can do the work faster, better, easier, so that you really ensure that the brain capacity and the drive of your people is not blocked, at least, right? So you want to really do the digital in a way that work can happen really fast, really easy, and that it can be fun. We need to bring the fun back into companies because we're working with people, and there needs to be that collaboration, and it needs to be easy, right? And also the entire information flow, the data and so on. Digital is great for making that happen. But we also need to be careful that we're not, I think that was a brilliant remark of one of the participants of your conference. In my eyes, I agree with that gentleman that said we also need to be careful that we just only do digital for the sake of digital, and that we totally use digital for now everybody can work at home for the rest of our lives, and people at best don't meet each other any longer. in the long run, I'm not sure whether that's not going to kill the drive. If everybody works remote forever, ever, and people never see each other again, right? It might save the company some money, but I'm not sure whether in the long run it might not kill a lot of energy as well, right? So I think the question always is like, what makes sense for your company and for your people? I always say, how do we want to, where are we? And where do we want to be in the future? And that's a question that only a collective can answer. Only the people can answer together and find everything around us. And technology plays a great role.
I heard your position on the long run of the digital and remote working, but let's go a step backwards to what is your evaluation of this instant remote and distributed work situation at scale that we have perceived with and experienced with COVID now? Has this already brought some movement into this, also in this hesitations, maybe also of organizations to change their organization design? I mean, certainly there are these traditional companies, and there are people that have their position, and certainly if something goes wrong, they might change or come to you or other organizational design consultants and ask for help. But they will only come to you and to all the others if they feel the urgency, as Kotler is saying. So has COVID brought up some new urgency to change in regards to the organizational design?
That's another good question. I want to say yes and no, right? I think on the one hand, it has shown for sure 5,000% that every organization that thought yesterday that they cannot change, that it's not possible for them, they have changed. Period, right? They even changed on their own. So they didn't even need consulting firms. They just changed because they had to, right? So structural pain or traumatic events are sadly so a very great change driver. If you have to change, you will change. If you have to adapt, you will adapt. It's as easy as that. I just wish that companies could become a little bit more proactive around this whole thing, because how we change now, there could be lingering side effects for the future. Remote work is not like remote work is not remote work. You can do this in very, very different ways, right? There can be it can be exciting, and it can be super lame, and you can experience a super big energy loss around this. So I would hope that companies have seen that change is possible, because if you have to, you will. And that we can also tackle this a little bit more proactively, so that we don't have to go through the same loop with every traumatic and disruptive crisis, because the next change is just around the corner, and it's a question of being easy, seemingly effortlessly able to adapt to whatever happens. It shouldn't be the big hoo-ha, right?
But what are your recommendations on the next step for those companies and organizations who got the taste now, or the first taste of that it might work if we do something differently? And what are your recommendations on how they move forward, and what do they have to do in regards to the organizational designing and change at the moment after they experience this first period of instant distributed working? And now maybe some people are already calling for coming back to the office, if it's allowed or not. We will see how the pandemic certainly will develop, but if there are people in the organizations that see, yes, and now we should do something more on the organization design, what are your recommendations on the next steps?
I don't have a roadmap that or a playbook that works for every company, right? We tailor designs, and I would even consider it very irresponsible of me to say, oh, we do this, and the other, and I haven't even seen what the companies are like. I would say it always starts with a conversation. Period. It sounds lame, but it always starts with a conversation. It always starts with a soul searching. Where are we? It starts with brutal honesty. I think in my experience, change goes wrong, or never starts, worse, never starts if people are not honest. The people that want to start now, they should start. That's important, right? Don't sit it out. Don't say it's not so bad. Don't say, okay, we barely, we got this, we managed to sort of sit this out. The next one might kill you then, right? So I think it starts with brutal honesty. Where are we? And going back to your very first question, how do we know? Let's sit down and really say, how did we fare during this very, very traumatic crisis? How did we do on the people level? How do our people feel? Did they feel equipped during the times that they were at home? Did they feel invigorated? Did they feel it was fun, although it was from home? Did they even think it was funner working from home? Was it better? What was better? How can we keep these things as we're going back to the office or not, right? So I think it starts with a brutally honest introspection and reflection on how we do things and how did we do during this crisis, and then take it from there. And then you will also really see which levels were totally redundant to start out with, right? You might even see while you were working, I was about to say abroad, from home, which hierarchy levels were absolutely not necessary. For example, I recently talked to a couple of banks, and they said they were always like, for certain things, you have to come into the office. And then during COVID, oops, no, you didn't, right? All of a sudden, your customers didn't have to come to the office any longer. And then I would strongly suggest keep that. You should make it easy for your people and for your customers, of course. So I think it's a wonderful time to see what worked, what didn't work, what can we chip away, and how do our people feel, and how can we empower them to make faster decisions, and to collaborate in a much better way. So I know,
and this will support these vibrant communities at the end, and they will urge the change at the end. Is that right?
Yes, I would say what that conversation does is it gives you a lot of data, right? It creates some honesty, which a lot of employees are actually missing, right? It creates some transparency also. And it will show you also from a structural level, what can we actually chip away? Which hierarchy levels were absolutely not necessary while we were working from home.
Would you say that this can be realized out of the middle of the company? Actually, the question behind this is, at one point, certainly our community at the IOM Summit, they are project leads for digital working. So they are not in charge for redesigning the organization at first. So they're coming from, they don't have the project for that and the project call for this. And then on the second background to my question is that there's a lot of discussion in the German community that if we want to make change consistent and sustainable in the company, then we have to enforce some change movement out of the middle of the company. Because if it's just a top-down order, nothing will change. If it's just a grassroots thing at the bottom, nothing would change. Only if we can achieve a movement out of the middle of the company, then change will stay at the end also in the company and not be just a a thing for a moment?
Yeah, so there are a lot of questions, so I'm trying to unpack. Number one, if you want to redesign your organization, of course, the top needs to be involved, right? It can't be top down, period. Even if a company came to us and said, would you do this? We would clear cut say no, because we don't like failure. So you can't trickle down something that's supposed to be a vibrant collaboration. But you can also not change, for example, reporting structures from the middle, right? So in the adaptive organization and enterprise agility, there is usually a happy double whopper of even paradoxes. So we have centralization and we have decentralization at the same time. The question is, where do you have what, right? So these things need an overall umbrella view. And then it's also like it can't happen so quickly, right? So our initiatives take anything from 8 months to 2 years, right? So we need to be really careful. So I always have a hard time with these. This needs to happen. This needs to happen. This needs to happen. I don't know, but so it's usually that everything happens at the same time, or at least in a well orchestrated way that. Everybody is really involved, and everybody also needs to change. Sometimes when we talk to the top of the organization, you hear in the conversation that they say, okay, could you go in and change them? And we always say, no, the top will actually change quite considerably, because they will have to give up some power, right? They will be even the midline leaders will be much more detached from the actual decision making. But in my eyes, we need to work with those mid-level leaders and the top to get them emotionally and behaviorally ready to get to that point, right? You can't just start the revolution from the middle. But of course, in many companies, we have a little bit of a hybrid form, right? So that percentage is much higher than 10%, that we have those tech sales that work in an agile way. And that's where I always think you can work as, let's say you are a tech leader in that realm and you have your little happy shell there, your happy team where it's actually working quite well. Here, I would say you can do the same work and it's much easier because you have 10 people, right? What worked, what didn't work, how can we do things better? And in an adaptive and agile organization, we do that on a daily basis. We don't do this once a year when COVID strikes. We do this on a daily basis. What can we improve? What can we improve? What can we improve? And the way I think we can improve things in general is that the leader then is responsible for, when I said network, so many tech cells, they work on various teams. So it's very agile and it's very distributed, even under normal circumstances. The leader then is responsible for the information flow between teams, that people really have the best conditions, that the leader can also be an ambassador for this kind of work and the benefits of it to the rest of the organization. In some companies, really sort of box through your ideas against the rest of the company. So these things are possible. But a message to the top, you can have a lot of agile teams and not have an adaptive company. So that's where we need some overall thinking of what else we can do so that it doesn't only stay the agile tech teams or the collaborative teamwork here.
But still, this movement would already help then at the end, the overall transformation. So this movement of vibrant communities and networks and teams that are somehow connected.
I cannot say yes to that because I've seen this go wrong more often than not, right? So the thing is, I would even say that there are a lot of companies that have tried this transformation from the middle, and if the top is not willing to change and they need some help, it's not, sometimes people start that from the middle. They always say our leadership is so blah, blah, blah. But, they
But
are.
isn't it true that if the movement also in the middle is big enough, and that there will a tipping point that the top management cannot do else than change?
I've never seen that happen. I mean, I would be the first to say like, yeah, Chaka, that's fantastic. How would that happen? I mean, we have owners of the companies, we have investors, we have, we can't just sort of say, oh, we're going to do whatever, and then the top is going to change at one point. What's much more likely to happen, and that's how these huge failure rate statistics even only come to life, is that it's going to fail. The top is not going to change, and the investor structures are not going to change. Meanwhile, we're going to have another crisis, and that could be the last crisis of the company. So I don't even see the benefits of doing it that way. And I'm not advocating for top-down, but it's also a very, very mass psychological process, and that's what people don't see. We come from an org psychological background, from a behavioral background, from a cognitive background. For large scale organizational change, for true change to happen, we need to work on the circumstances. We need to prepare the field, the structures. We need to do this. Yes, we need to do this in a collaborative way, but we also need to help the decision makers change as well, just as much as the middle of the organization gets their change help as well. It's a psychological process to give up power and to change how you collaborate. That's a very, very drastic change. And then we also have external stakeholders. They also need to be on board. And that, this needs to, it's a huge effort. So large scale organizational change is not easy. It can be done. It's fantastic, fascinating work. But I think the crux is that if it goes wrong, we will have wasted a lot of resources. And by that, I mean money, time, and we will have created change resistance and change fatigue, I should say. So I even talked to a consultant the other day that said, we always do it this way, and then the top won't change, and then we're out, and then the whole thing. And in my eyes, then you've done the company harm, because it's another 6-8 months down the line, another 6-8 months where the company is not adaptive. The next crisis hits, we have less money, we have more change fatigue, we have more this, that, and the other. It's still not decluttered, it's still not adaptive, and it could kill us. So it's...
Okay, I fully understand your point of view. But the question for me is still, can the project lead out of the middle from this digital working projects, he cannot make the company change at the end, because if the top management also needs to support not only his project that they want to work digitally, but also needs to support the idea that the organizational design is changed, period. But what can this person, because this is our main community, what can this person do supportively to make this mind change shift at the top management? What can they do? What are your recommendations on that? How can they pave the pathway towards this mind change that top management says, yes, we have to change now, and we have to bring in now some organizational design consultants that help us in this way?
So in my eyes, there is a lot that you can do on the team level, right? I mean, the first thing is, it's almost like create some data, make your team really compelling. If your team produces great results in the way you're working, then maybe you can make that case, right? But it's still, I also talk to a lot of mid-level leaders, and I think they should also avoid a certain polarization. It's us versus them. It's us versus the top management, right? Understand that in this game, everybody needs some time to grow into certain things, and they need to be convinced that it's really working. And for that, you need to have your team in order in a great collaborative way, and you need to produce great results. And then we still need to see whether, you know, just duplicating this won't make the case, right? So seek the conversation, I would say. First, really make sure that your team lives that philosophy and really improves on a daily basis. And then they should also have the compelling results. And if you then make the case for that in an organization, the question is, how can we translate that success for the bigger to the bigger organization? And then really make sure that you don't create the big divide between top management and your team, but seek the overall conversation. That's what adaptability is about. We can't work with polarized groups. We need to be in this together. So understand that mindset shifts take some time. There needs to be compelling data. There needs to be excellent collaboration, and then seek the conversation, and don't wear yourself out. You know, not every mid-level leader, in my eyes, it's the level that wears itself out the most. You can also enjoy your team success and not create the big change in the company, right? So sometimes I talk to mid-level leaders and they literally wear themselves out because they consistently try to convince top management and it's not working, and then they get so frustrated. So try also to enjoy your successes, because otherwise you wouldn't want to improve every single day, right? Sometimes it can be great to just have a great functioning team. We don't always need to overthrow the entire company from a mid-level point of view. It will wear you out. That's my experience.
Great. Thank you for your time. Thank you for this discussion. We're at the end, already 3 minutes over time. So thank you also everybody who watched us this afternoon and watched us later. We're at the end of this IOM Talk. Ich darf nochmal die letzten Worte auch in Deutsch sagen. Vielen Dank alle, die uns zugehört haben. Und es geht weiter natürlich mit den weiteren ergänzenden Veranstaltungen rund um IOM Summit. Diese Woche am Freitag schon mit dem nächsten Interaktivformat. Einfach mal schauen auf iomsummit.de. Gibt es alle Termine in diesem Fortbildungsprogramm, was wir hier bis zum 30. September noch haben. Bis dahin, bleibt alle gesund, bleibt uns gewogen. Bis nächste Woche, Dienstag. Vielen Dank fürs Zuschauen. Thank you again, Erika.
Thank you.